Hi, I'm Nicole Saylor. I'm the director of the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. I'd like to welcome you to today's presentation, which is part of our ongoing Benjamin A. Botkin Lecture Series. The Botkin Lectures allow us to highlight the work of leading scholars in the disciplines of folklore, ethnomusicology, oral history, and cultural documentation, while enhancing and expanding the collections here at the library. So each lecture is recorded, as you'll see, and will become part of the library's collection and freely available online. And so this would probably be a good time to remind you to turn off your cell phone so you are not archived in the Library of Congress. All right, so today I'm very excited. We have the honor of introducing the distinguished folklorist and respected colleague, Marilyn White. Dr. White, who is, yeah, right, give it up. Okay. All right, Dr. White, who is currently president of the American Folklore Society, is a retired professor of anthropology at Kean University in New Jersey, where she taught from 1985 to 2011. She received her PhD in folklore from the University of Texas at Austin, her MA in folklore at Indiana University, and her BA in English from Hampton University. She is a key member of such influential groups as the Association of African and African American Folklorists, City Lore, the Center for Urban Folk Culture in New York City, the New Jersey Folklore Society, and she serves on academic and public folklore committees too numerous to mention. Her research interests include African American folklore, family folklore, stratification, jokes, and humor. She has been conducting long-term research in Little Cayman Island in the Caribbean. Today, yes, Dr. White will reflect on her career, her experiences, and the challenges that must be met for the field of folklore to become more inclusive and reflective of 21st century America. So please join me in welcoming Dr. White for her Botkin lecture, Folklore Today, Folklore Tomorrow, Expanding the Conversation. Welcome.
So thank you, and it's so wonderful to be here and to see a number of my folklore friends, even somebody who's from my own hometown, Jim Deutsch, who've taken time out of work or vacation to be here, and special thanks to Nancy Gross for reaching out to me to be one of the Botkin Lecture speakers. When she first asked me if I'd be willing to come and speak, reflecting on my career and some of the challenges that the field faces, I had a somewhat grandiose idea of the talk and a title, but Nancy let me know that this is also for the general audience and not just folklore scholars. Relying on her expertise, I revised my ideas and decided to go with her title. And while I do want to talk about expanding the conversation, I realized that I had a problem with folklore today, folklore tomorrow. When I was still teaching, especially my African American studies courses, it was necessary to put things in context. And that context meant looking back in time and letting the students know something about West African history and culture, and even discussing other parts of the African diaspora. Likewise, in this talk, I could not talk about folklore today without looking back to the past, and equally, I could not reflect on my career without looking back at my past. For me, then, this is also my folklore origin story. While our discipline is incredibly wide-ranging, covering almost all aspects of human life, especially of people's various identity groups, in many respects, it's also perceived as being esoteric, as not even being recognized as a field of study by some, as being insignificant or lower tier by others. Therefore, one of the questions that we folklorists are interested in knowing is each other's origin story. How did you become a folklorist? How did you find out about and learn about the discipline? Because of the number of folklorists here, if you're not a folklorist, you might want to take advantage of the opportunity and talk to us and find out about the folks' own origin story, because their stories might be very different. You might want to talk to several different people. That way you'll have a greater sense of the field itself, as what we've done since we came into the field will be incredibly varied as well. I started off as a biology major in college, but a C in botany, a D in zoo, a D in, a D in math let me know pretty quickly that if I didn't change majors, I was going to have a really short college career. Though the term was not used back then, not everybody is cut out for a STEM major or career, though I still love especially the life sciences and have a number of books on birds, as Barry might be able to attest, and on sea life. And I've often joked in my next life I might want to be an ornithologist or a marine biologist. I'd also loved English language and literature, and so switched to English education. But I soon realized that I did not want to be a high school English teacher. I then switched to English liberal arts. But that would mean going to grad school, as I wasn't sure what I was going to do with just a bachelor's degree. One of my professors thought that I was interested in linguistics and recommended Kent State and Indiana University. I got both catalogs when universities were still mailing them out and poured through them. For Kent State, I decided on their English Master of Arts in Teaching, MAT. I looked at both IU's English and linguistics departments, but then when I was flipping through the catalog, I saw the folklore department and the list of courses: folk narrative, mythology, North American Indian folklore, English and Scottish popular ballads. I wasn't sure exactly what all the courses were about, but I was a kid who had devoured fairy tales and stories from other cultures, who had taken 2 years of Latin in high school and learned the Greek alphabet years before I joined a sorority, and had read a ton of stories of Greek and Roman deities. I had fallen in love with folk music and would go over to Greenwich Village with a friend and take in the folk scene. And I had even bought a guitar and strummed badly, and even worse, finger-picked more badly, and learned those tunes, as a matter of fact, from songbooks. These courses in IU's catalog weren't just about reading and analyzing literature. They were teaching how to study and understand the people who told the stories and the context in which they were told, and the audiences who heard them. This was everything and more that English was not. I applied to both Kent State and Indiana, and Kent State offered me a full ride. Indiana, a partial scholarship. Called up my father and told him that I really wanted to go to Indiana, even though it would mean more money out of his pocket, a serious consideration, what with my sister in college and my brother soon to be there. Fortunately, my father said yes. Ironically, sadly, during my first year at IU, the 4 students were killed by the National Guard at Kent State while protesting the Vietnam War. And in a subsequent conversation, my father said that he was glad that I hadn't gone there. While at IU, I had a number of courses with Richard Dorson, fieldwork with Henry Glassy, ballads with W. Edson Richmond, among others. I had wanted to take narrative with Linda Daig, but she might have been on sabbatical, so I took it with Warren Roberts, who later specialized in material culture. Some of my classmates at the MA and PhD level included Bill Wiggins, Frank DeCaro and Roseanne Jordan, Yvonne Millspaw, Bill Ivey, Cam Collins, and so many others. During my first year, I was staying on campus during spring break, and Dr. Dorson asked if I would stay with Stith Thompson and his wife, help them out, take them to doctor's appointments, etc. And I did so. As a relative newbie folklorist and overwhelmed to be in such close proximity to an important figure in folklore, I mean the Arnie Thompson tail type index, the motif index, I really did not take advantage of sitting at the great man's feet, as it were, and asking all the kinds of questions and learning what I could. At the end of the week, Dr. Dorson asked if I'd be willing to stay with the Thompsons for the rest of the semester, continuing to help them out. I actually declined, especially because from almost my first day in Eigenmann dorm, I'd made friends with a varied group of Black grad students. Though there are all kinds of racial issues surrounding this, you might want to look at Beverly Daniel Tatum's classic 1997 book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? This was exactly how we had come together. Seeing a Black student sitting at a table in the dining room and joining that person, and others coming to join. And soon we occupied several tables and continued to meet, eat, hang out together, and become friends, some of whom I know to this day. Often when one is in the minority in numbers, one looks for, quote, one's own, where you don't have to be on guard, where there can be shorthanded conversations, because you're speaking the same language, where there is or can be mutual understanding. This is what I found with that group of Black grad students in Eigenmann. What I found with my sorority sisters, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, especially when I was at predominantly white institutions. What I found with African American faculty and staff groups, whether formally organized or not. And what I found when what became the Association of African and African American Folklorists had its first conference in 1975. In regard to the 4AF, that's a shorthand for the long title. In regard to the 4AF, though we only had 3 conferences of our own during the 1970s, we have met for decades during the AFS annual meeting. In addition to our traditional dinner, we have organized panels and forums and/or have sponsored others, including financial support. We attend each other's presentations. We reach out to and welcome new members to the fold, often serving as mentors for them, and share news and information through emails. It's all our way of saying, we're here, and we, too, are doing the work. At the end of 2 years at IU, I would have my master's, but I wasn't sure what would come next. I couldn't burden my father with all 3 of us in college, so I wrote to my favorite professor back at Hampton asking if there might be the possibility of my joining the faculty. She wrote back that Hampton wouldn't work out, but she'd gotten a request from an English department chair in Washington State, and they were looking for someone who could teach African American lit, folklore, cultural studies, as well as traditional English courses. I did a phone interview, and got interviewed and then hired at what is now Central, whoa, that didn't work, so let's do this. At what is now Central Washington University in Ellensburg, Washington, literally right smack dab in the middle of the state. Again, I made wonderful friends there and had a great experience teaching a wide variety of courses, including Native American folklore, Mexican American folklore, as well as African American lit, English lit, the dreaded composition. I realized, however, that if I were going to stay at the university level, I'd need a PhD. In 1972, AFS was meeting in Austin, Texas, and I decided to go because Roger Abrams was teaching at UT, and I wanted to study with him, one of the foremost scholars of African American folklore and culture. When I attended the annual meeting, I had a chance to talk with Roger, as well as with Dick Bauman, who headed the folklore program at UT. They urged me to apply. I did, got accepted, along with an offer to be a teaching assistant, teaching African American folklore. When I went to Texas, my fellow students included John McDowell and Beverly Stolce, who subsequently ended up on the faculty at IU, Nick Spitzer at Tulane and of American Roots, Sabra Weber, later of Ohio State University, Meg Brady at Utah, Jose Limon, and the recently deceased John Blatch. Barbara Kirschenblatt Gimblett was just about to leave, as well as my long-term AFS roommate, Susan Roach, recently retired from Louisiana Tech. The program in the early and mid-'70s was incredible and productive and innovative, led by Dick Bauman, Roger Abrams, and Americo Paredes, as well as my fellow Indiana alum, Frank DeCaro, among others. With the subsequent departure of Roger and then Dick and Beverly, and without university support to replace all of the lines lost, the program was diminished. But not before producing Kay Turner, past president of AFS, and, among others, recent AFS fellows Pat Sawin, Ricky Saltzman, and AFC's own Guha Shankar. During my early years at Texas, my mother came to visit me, and of course, among others, I introduced her to Roger Abrams. Roger shared some of his stories about his time and work in Philadelphia. My mother told him that some members of her extended family had left Cumberland, Virginia, about 45 miles west of Richmond, and had moved to Philadelphia. This was not just an ordinary move, but a specific subset of the Great Migration. They moved and crossed the color line, passing for white, seeking a better economic and social life, and escaping prejudice, discrimination, and lack of opportunities. Escaping racism and everything that entailed. There are two ways of passing, as this was called. One way was to live Black and work white. In other words, one would obtain a job by passing for white, but the person would carefully live life outside of work as a Black person, hoping not to get caught by white work colleagues. During my dissertation fieldwork, I learned that my great-uncle, Grant Dungy, did this for a time, but, as I was told, he found it too stressful and stopped doing it. The other way of doing it was the way that some of my Coleman relatives did, permanently cross the color line, pass for white, conceal everything about one's former life, and again, hope not to get caught. While these relatives did pass, apparently they kept some lines of communication open, as my mother shared that they would send packages of goods back to their family in Virginia. Though this would have made for an interesting study in and of itself, man, I could have been Isabel Wilkerson, the Warner Brothers' sons, but you gotta share the wealth, as it were. But the conversation between Roger and my mother did lay the groundwork for what became my dissertation, a study of my mother's family and two more interrelated families, the relationships that these three branches of the family had with each other, as well as with the Black community and the white community in that rural county, focusing on the years 1860 to 1940, from the time when I could find records to the time of the last of my mother's siblings left the area. And just so you know, those of us of the next and the next generations still own the land, and the house is still there, though unoccupied. Interestingly, I was recently contacted by a middle school teacher in Cumberland, and using my dissertation, he and his students continued to research and recently submitted a proposal to the state to have a historical marker installed to honor two of my ancestors, my great-grandfather, Shed Dungy, who, as a matter of fact, served in the Virginia House of Delegates during Reconstruction, and my great-great-uncle, Reuben Turner Coleman. So spring 2024 will be a family, a county school system, and community celebration when the marker is installed. Though it was an important time in my life, I don't have this might be a little bit long anyway. I don't really have time to detail all of my experiences at Western Kentucky when I taught there from 1977 to 1985, teaching folklore and Black Studies courses. I've explored erasure in a lot of what I've already discussed, and I'll return to it later. But suffice it to say that Western Kentucky was guilty of it when they decided to eliminate Black Studies in 1984, and thus also my position. Although they ultimately revived it, it was after I left. Fortunately, they gave me 1 year. I wound up going to AFS's meeting in San Diego, which I wasn't planning on going to, but they said, okay, we can maybe help you do a job search. That's another story as well. But I wound up being hired at Kean University in 1985, which was fabulous because it meant I was back home and actually lived in my parents' house. Kean presented me with several opportunities that led to wonderful fieldwork research. In my own department, one of the sociologists lived and taught in Japan. When I taught at Western Kentucky, I played on an intramural volleyball faculty and staff group with people from all over the university. One who was part of the landscaping team for the city was also the husband of a sociologist. Kaz Abe had grown up in Japan, studied in new Japanese martial arts, and took his volleyball seriously, even playing in volleyball-specific shoes. When he offered a course on Japanese language and culture, I jumped at the chance and took it for a semester. When my Kean colleague found out about it, he and I shared our love and interest in all things Japanese. Dr. Don Wheeler, along with a colleague of his at another New Jersey State College, applied for and received a Fulbright grant to take New Jersey College faculty to Japan for 6 weeks over the summer to study and learn. I applied and got accepted to the program. Each of us had our own research topic, and I was fascinated by a group of people in Japan who had been discriminated against for 2,000 years. Though they are, quote unquote, racially or ethnically Japanese, they have been discriminated against because of their occupations. The buraku, meaning village or hamlet, and sometimes burakumin, with mean, meaning people, have traditionally slaughtered animals, tanned hides, worked with leather, and done jobs that have been seen as being ritually polluting by both major religions in Japan, Shinto and Buddhism. Especially in the past, they were called names such as eta, extreme filth, or sometimes hinin, or non-human, or been referred to with 4 fingers held up, or the word yotsu, a variation of the number 4, as in 4-legged or animal. While it may be considered a good location now, in the past, near the riverbank was not where one wanted to live, especially if it were outside the safety of walled cities. And thus, one of the old names for the buraku was Kawari Mono, or riverbank people. The occupations that they were restricted to have been described in the Japanese language as the 3 Ks that translate to hard, dirty, dangerous. Though a lot has changed in recent years for the buraku, we know that it's sometimes easier to change the laws than to change people's minds. Changes were made beginning with the Meiji Restoration in the late 1800s. But when I did my research in the early 1990s, I was able to visit buraku communities still in existence in Tokyo, Kyoto, and Osaka. And All of these communities were right by the riverbank. I interviewed a woman who worked for a human rights organization who told me that she'd wanted to be a journalist, but she said that she knew better than to apply, as they do a background search and find out about her heritage. She was referring to the family registers that go back generations, that among other things indicate where one's family lived. And if it showed that it was in a traditional Baraku neighborhood, they would know her background and not hire her. Part of what fascinated me so much about this group were the many similarities with the history and experiences of African Americans, from neighborhood or housing restrictions, economic, educational, social segregation, derogatory names and prejudice, as well as violence perpetrated on the group, and so many other examples. Ironically, there was another connection with African Americans in my family. I had earlier mentioned members of another branch of my family who had moved away, cut ties with most of their family, and passed for white, as well as my great uncle who for a time, quote unquote, lived Black and worked white. At a gathering of Baraku that I attended in Osaka, a woman spoke of doing exactly this. Though, as I said, Baraku are racially or ethnically Japanese. She was passing by hiding her Baraku identity. She said that she had gotten a job that, had they known of her heritage, she would not have gotten. She would go into the city and work and return on the train. When she disembarked, she said that she would hang around at the station, pretending to look at displays or look in the shops. She did this in case any of her coworkers might see her. When she was sure that she was safe, she would literally cross the railroad tracks and go to her home in the Baraku neighborhood. Very much like my great uncle Grant, she said that she had to stop passing because it was too stressful, living a double life, fearing that she might get caught, pretending to be something that she was not. Another fieldwork opportunity came when a colleague in geology reached out to me because she had heard that I was a scuba diver. In 1998, Dr. Carrie Manfrino had started a coral monitoring program that tracks the changes in coral and fish densities that led to the founding of the Central Caribbean Marine Institute, CCMI, and the physical site of the Little Cayman Research Center. When I first went there, it didn't look like this because some of those buildings weren't there. So the building on the left, the smaller building, that wasn't there. So you had to, in order to use the bathroom, you had to go down the stairs, walk either by the water or by the road to the bath building, which is where the toilets were. You had to go up the stairs, use the toilets because they were composting toilets. I mean, it was seriously green energy. I don't have time to go into all of the details. I want to talk about some of my research, but there's so much more. So during the academic year 2004-2005, Carrie invited interested faculty from across the university to a meeting where she was discussing the research center and the kind of work that people were doing there, from coral monitoring to research on mangrove habitats or iguanas or fish populations. While all of the other attendees were scientists of one kind or another, I was the only folklorist/anthropologist, but I'd been wanting to do a long-term project somewhere, and this fit the bill as it was a small island with a relatively small population. In summer of 2005, I began a long-term ethnographic research project on Little Cayman, returning over many summers to conduct interviews with a number of the residents and exploring foodways, issues of identity, sense of place, among others. The Cayman Islands, part of the British Commonwealth, are located just south of Cuba. They are comprised of Grand Cayman, the seat of government, the sister islands, Cayman Brac and Little Cayman. It might be a little small, but they're not like this. They're more like this, with Cayman Brac further to the east. Then there's a Little Cayman, and then you go quite a ways, and then there's Grand Cayman. So, for Little Cayman, the smallest of the islands, is approximately 1 mile wide and 10 miles long. It wasn't until May 1992 that everyone on Little Cayman got electricity. From a high of about 190 people, it now has a population of about 161. One of the shaping forces of the Cayman Islands was a very late hurricane occurring in November 1932 that took the islands by surprise and especially devastated Little Cayman to the point where it never regained its pre-hurricane population. Of those 161 people, no more than a dozen are actually eligible to vote. Of the people, only a tiny handful, maybe half a dozen, are actually from Little Cayman. Many are quote-unquote expats, people from the United States, Europe, Central America, or other islands in the Caribbean who have become permanent residents of Little Cayman. A few of these have become nationalized as Cayman citizens. Others have status. That is, they have some of the privileges that citizens have except the right to vote. A number of other people were born in Cayman Brac or Grand Cayman and have made Little Cayman their permanent home. A small number of people have permanent residences elsewhere but live part of the year in Little Cayman. While many residents have come to claim a Little Cayman identity, the differences in nationalities or ethnicities, whether they are expats or locals, whether they work or on permanent vacation, and whether they work in tourism or some other businesses, have led to differences in the level of community involvement, in interests, in how they may see their roles, and that of others in Little Cayman society and culture. It's led as well to differences in how they see, understand, and choose to use the natural, built, and cultural environment. Thus, my research projects over the years have explored cultural and environmental sustainability and sense of community, or a lack thereof. One of my key research collaborators was Perry McLaughlin, a Caymanian of color originally from Cayman Brac. He was a successful businessman with a rental car company, a real estate company, a liquor store, insurance company, among other businesses and governmental involvements. He was also a member of the Liquor Licensing Board. He was incredibly articulate in discussing some of the problems facing the Cayman Islands in general and Little Cayman in particular. His greatest concerns were in the areas of tourism and education. Regarding tourism or hospitality industry, Perry said that there was something wrong when foreigners run the resorts and there's not a single Caymanian. He thought that the industry needed Caymanians instead of foreigners, but there's a problem of wages. As he said, money is so small. Specifically regarding Little Cayman, he thought that the people are selfish, that there was a problem when expats outnumber the native Caymanians and are not fully and deeply aware of Caymanian history and culture. As an example, when I asked the late Gladys Howard, the founder of Pirates Point Resort, as well as the James Beard award-winning chef, about the extent to which she included Caymanian culture, she said she did so through cooking. For example, when people come to Little Cayman for the 4-day Easter holiday, she said it was a treat for her guests to have the native cooking, and that, quote, the native ladies do the cooking. Moreover, Perry noted that the expats point their people to their own people and not to the natives. He went so far as to say that he thought they would want the island free of natives. He did point out that it had changed a little bit. When he came back to Little Cayman as a permanent resident in 1991, he described it as being hostile. One example of the way things hadn't changed was that he described how someone had come into the liquor store and bought a lot of liquor for a party. And the person also gave out invitations to the party, but did not include Perry. He mentioned that he was invested in Little Cayman, but sometimes he felt as if he were between a rock and a hard place. He said that he thought about walking away around 1998, but he said he would have been beaten metaphorically, and he didn't want to do that. While he felt that he had a role and was happy in the business community, he said he felt closed off after 6 p.m. As he poignantly put it, he's nobody. Perry dies. Furthermore, he expressed great concern that the expats did not really know Caymanian history, traditions, or culture. As a result, Perry said that non-Caymanian celebrations have been introduced to Little Cayman. One that has been very popular among a number of expats and tourists is Mardi Gras. This is a celebration that Gladys Howard introduced because she missed the New Orleans celebration. But Caymanians traditionally do not celebrate it. Perry went so far as to say that he felt that his culture has been hijacked. This ties in with education. He mentioned that many of the teachers don't know Caymanian culture or traditions, either because they are not Caymanian and or because they haven't learned them. He felt that the teachers, for the most part, were doing the best that they could, but also that too much of Caymanian culture is lost, gone, disappeared. For context, the Cayman Islands has a total population of around 70,000, but only 37,000 are Caymanians. The non-Caymanian workforce is 47%. For Little Cayman, of a population of 161, only 48 are native Caymanians, with 113 being from somewhere else. Perhaps one of the most telling comments that illustrates the difference between Little Caymanians of whatever origin was the one made by Perry. I get spoken to when it's convenient for them to speak to me. Now I want to consider larger issues in the field of folklore, reflecting on folklore and especially the American Folklore Society. I'm reminded of a certain governor who says about his state, it's where woke goes to die. What I love about folklore is that we're woke, and we're proud of that. First of all, the governor doesn't understand the meaning of the term. It means being aware, knowledgeable, informed, sensitive to others, willing to listen and hear their stories, experiences, histories, understanding that one's own story isn't the only one. When I was a kid, I had memorized a poem. I had no idea of the origin, and in those days there wasn't very much gender diversity. I did a search and found the poem, learning that it's a Persian origin. He who knows not and knows not that he knows not, he is a fool. Shun him. He who knows not and knows that he knows not, he is a child. Teach him. He who knows and knows not that he knows, he is asleep. Wake him. He who knows and knows that he knows, he is wise. Follow him. In many respects, this sums up what being woke is about. And in my opinion, we know who should be shunned. Folklorists, because of the broad, inclusive, encompassing work that we do, should be followed, although granted, sometimes we're not quite awake. Over the decades, folklore has responded to the needs of folklorists in the communities that we serve, and we're still learning more and better ways to do this. Within AFS, recognizing the diversity of the field and the many interests of folklorists, there are now more than 30 sections, ranging from those focused on regions or ethnic groups, such as African, African American, Latino, Caribbean, transnational Asian, and Pacific. Genre, such as dance, folk arts, narrative, literature, creative writing and storytelling, oral history, medieval, music and song, foodways, comics, gender or identity, such as LGBTQIA+, women, or responses or approaches to current events, such as politics and social justice, socialist and post-socialist, and a soon-to-be new one focusing on climate change, and so many more. Examples of the kinds of work that folklorists are doing range from the aforementioned creative writing, where folklorists are not just studying, but doing their own. And we can see this in, I had no idea. And we can see this in the novel Seasonal by Betty Belanis, whose protagonist is a folklorist. And in Peggy Yoakum's creative rewriting of A Grimm Fairy Tale, where she explores the main character's experiences by considering what is literally hidden within or erased from the words and lines. So I don't know if you could see this, and you might want to maybe take a look at her book if you don't want to buy it. But I mean, even the very title, all kinds of fur. But you see the letters in red, Kin's Fur. So that what she does is she takes the page, the story itself, and then plucks out letters and plucks out words. And so you get the retelling of the story. The Journal of American Folklore has recently recognized this creative use of folklore by including a new section within the journal that presents creative works, an example of the evolution of the field, or of folklore today, folklore tomorrow. Because of our unique training and perspectives, we have numerous examples of folklore speaking out on and helping the general public understand critical issues of the day. These include the great work that both Kiran Singh and Queen Noor do with storytelling, using it for movement building, conflict resolution, and healing. Among others, we can point to the valuable work that Pat Turner has been doing in researching African American culture and exploring the roles that rumor has played in explaining the experience of being Black in America, as well as the racism that Barack and Michelle Obama had to deal with before, during, and even after his presidency. Andrea Kita also has explored the role and effect of rumor, but her work is focused on recent medical crises, vaccine development, public health issues. These folklorists, as well as many others, are using folklore tools in ethnographic research to understand and explain climate change, sustainability in its many forms, relationships between humans and other species, refugee and migrant experiences, and what can facilitate adaptation in new cultural and geographic locations, and cultural preservation in times of war or natural disasters. For this latter, as an example, I instituted a new AFS Prize, a Presidential Award for Meritorious Service, because a folklorist, a student no less, initiated efforts to protect a wide variety of cultural heritage documentation when Ukraine was suddenly invaded by Putin's forces from Russia. While she and her colleagues in need of information and resources as they sought safety during the invasion and became a resource to journalists and scholars trying to understand what was happening in real time on social media apps. She also took action as her colleagues in Ukraine worried about their work, multimedia research collections documenting decades of traditions in communities across Ukraine were under threat in individual homes holding researchers' hard drives, and in digital collections housed in museums and other cultural institutions. This work involved listening to the needs and advocating for support of colleagues in Ukraine, coordinating a team to amass appropriate resources, and relentless efforts to assist in the dissemination of information. Significantly, AFS, along with other learned societies, has spoken out on critical issues affecting the people we represent and the communities where we do our work. These have included our own statements, or those that we have signed off on, or issued by various individual learned societies or the larger body, the American Council of Learned Societies, or ACLS. With the Supreme Court's recent ruling on affirmative action, both the ACLS and the American Anthropological Association issued statements, and AFS signed off on both. And in explaining this to our membership and others, included the following as part of the lengthier statement. The American Folklore Society, AFS, is firmly committed to welcoming all who wish to honor and study expressive cultural traditions. Our guiding framework includes our mission and vision, our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and our history. So on the AFS website is this statement and also more detailed information about both the mission and the vision. Additional position statements have included a stand against race-based violence and injustice, compensation for self-employed folklorists, research with human subjects, and promotion and tenure standards and review. In addition, when our annual meeting has been held in locations that have proven problematic for any number of reasons, including labor issues or the Supreme Court decision affecting women's health choices, AFS has sought to create dialogue to help increase our own understanding and sensitivity, whether this has meant changing the theme of the meeting to address the issue, meeting with affected parties in the location, creating more space in the program, holding events in the community and not just at the hotel, and giving space to our own and to community members. In regard to this last point, while folklore has always valued the people that we work with in the past, this often meant that they were the ones giving us the information and we did the interpretation. To provide the semblance of even more objectivity, we often didn't even work within our own communities. Over the last decades, there have been radical shifts. The people who used to be called informants are now often referred to as research collaborators or research partners, among other terms, because of their in-depth knowledge of their communities and/or subject matter. They are often referred to as community scholars, what we were just talking about last night. And a number of folklorists are or have been doing research in their own communities, including the late Americo Paredes, who was on my dissertation committee and who did brilliant work in his own Chicano community, and those of us who studied our own families and their folklore, including Peggy Yoakum, Steve Zeitlin, the late Catherine Morgan, and yours truly. Among another example of change in AFS is with the fellows. For those attending the AFS annual meeting, one of the highlights every 3 years or so is the croning that the women's section does, honoring the accumulated wisdom of women who have turned 50. While the croning is often a raucous and irreverent event, it's also something that everyone looks forward to. Its origin was in the fact that there were relatively few women who were in fellows. And it was recognized that women and their research needed to be acknowledged and celebrated. Eventually, the fellows elected more and more women, and in recent years has undergone another change, electing people who have made significant contributions to the discipline in a wide variety of ways, and not just through publications. Just a few short years ago, I never thought that I'd be a fellow. But miracles happen, and times change. Thinking about the relationship of the past to the present, I was reminded of the origins of the American Folklore Society, founded in 1888. Many of the early studies focused on African American and Native American cultures, as the consideration was the possible loss of first-hand accounts from individuals who had personally experienced enslavement, or the heyday of American Indian culture before the completion of what came to be known as the westward expansion. In a similar vein, we can compare the establishment of the Veterans History Project of the AFC. As is stated on the website, it collects, preserves, and makes accessible the first-hand recollections of U.S. military veterans who served from World War I through more recent conflicts and peacekeeping missions, so that future generations may hear directly from veterans and better understand what they saw, did, and felt during their service. What would be lost if we didn't have those quote-unquote first-hand recollections? I'm reminded of a concept that is both old and new in folklore that harkens back to the beginnings of the discipline and is of concern to current-day folklorists, and that I've already noted in some previous examples. Only because I totally love her, and I love how she does this wording of this. Michelle Obama, in speaking about book banning even, said, we need to stay aware of whose stories are being told and whose are being erased. For folklorists, we can add all of the genres that make up our field: music, beliefs, material culture, clothing, hairstyles, agricultural and maritime practices, ways of knowledge, etc., etc., etc. What is lost when erasure, in whatever form, occurs? More so in the past, too often the work of folklorists of color was not included in the folklore curriculum even, so that student folklorists didn't know or learn about these people or their contributions. They had been erased. So, what's important, both of these pages are on AFS's website. This is why the exhibit and the pages for the notable folklorists of color are so significant, because they seek to unerase people and research and contributions to the field and expand the knowledge base, especially for folklorists. How can we do research with a toolkit if that toolkit is actually missing key pieces? Two important individuals who will, will undoubtedly be added to the group, whom we lost recently, are the late James Lane, brilliant community scholar of and from Crisfield, Maryland, and the late Roland Freeman, whose incandescent photos and research shed new light and different light on African American communities and material culture, especially quilts. A different kind of erasure has occurred over the last several decades, with decisions made by universities that have drastically cut or eliminated folklore programs. When university administrators don't understand the value of certain programs, they are underfunded. Or when faculty retire or go elsewhere, their lines are cut and new faculty are not hired, ultimately leading to programs not being sustainable. Sadly and unfortunately, we have seen this happen to the programs at the University of Pennsylvania, the University of Texas at Austin, where I received my PhD, and most recently the graduate program at Western Kentucky University. Though I'm not a public folklorist, I mourn the loss of Western Kentucky's program because I taught in the program from 77 to 85, and because of its leadership in training a great number of public folklorists, as well as those who subsequently received doctorates and became university professors, among others. What effect might these erasures of programs have on the accessibility of future folklorists to obtain the necessary education and training that they will need? Might it mean the decrease in our numbers? Or might it mean an even greater role for community scholars, with new folklorists coming into the field from any number of different pathways? Earlier, I had talked about my fieldwork for my dissertation on my mother's side of the family. I interviewed my mother and all of her siblings, members of my extended family, and a number of community members. One elderly woman to whom I was introduced was a gold mine, as well as making sure, she had known a number of members of past generations of my family, sharing many stories, as well as making sure that I knew when she was telling me what were from her own experiences and what could be described as hearsay. Mrs. Mary Booker Gilliam was a wonderful research collaborator, but during the interview, she said something that brought me up short. She said to me, "Well, he didn't ask me anything about my family." I had been so single-mindedly focused on learning all about my family that I didn't think to ask her about hers. I apologized, tried to save face, and asked her about her own family. Apparently, I redeemed myself because when we concluded the interview, she said with intense gratitude, "I'm so glad I'm telling these stories. I've been wanting to tell them a long time." This is what we folklorists do, or try to do. Listen to the stories that people want to tell, need to tell. Help provide a platform for their voices, their knowledge, their dances, their music, their arts, their crafts. Let them know that who they are and what they do and what they know are all invaluable and should be studied and shared widely. If we're lucky and do our work thoroughly and compassionately, the stories and culture of Mrs. Gilliam, the Baraku, the Cayman Islands, military veterans, and others will be told, heard, seen, presented, archived, and perhaps most importantly, understood. Let's make sure that these stories are not erased. Thank you. Yikes. Thank you. I'm so sorry. Well, I totally do. Do you guys? I mean, or we could just chat informally afterwards. It's all good. I'm sorry. I should have. I got it.
Yeah, thank you, Marilyn. That was wonderful. Towards the end, you mentioned the sad news about Western Kentucky's graduate program. So is the American Folklore Society taking any kind of action with either Western Kentucky or with the larger field?
There are a number of things that we've done, some of which have, if I can do it this way, been kind of like behind the scenes. One of the things that I'll tell you, and I mentioned this last night, I think, when we had dinner, without going into any details. There are a number of things that at AFS that the board does that sometimes that Jessica as the executive director, and that I did with Norma when she was past president, that we're doing now with Amy Skillman. That's behind the scenes that you might never hear about. So one of the things, we have board meetings twice a year. One is during the annual meeting, right before the meeting actually starts, and one is in the spring. And for both of those meetings, we had an agenda, and it got shot to pieces because of issues. And the key issue last fall at the annual meeting in Tulsa, in fact, was talking about Western Kentucky. We were dealing with a different issue at the spring board meeting. But there are some things that we're doing in so many respects. It's a done deal, but it's not official yet that the program is done. But again, to my mind, unless universities, they need a different model. And I've been talking about this forever. Universities aren't businesses in the sense that, quote unquote, a business is a business. And yet a lot of times it's relying on this corporate model. And sometimes what that means is there's certain kinds of programs that one thinks are part of what a university is, part of the very definition of what a university is. Philosophy, for example. A friend of mine has been talking about what's going on at West Virginia University, wiping out world languages and literatures. I mean, considering, this is 2023, and we are so interconnected throughout, the world. How can a program like that be wiped out? But, if you've got a particular model in mind, what's the bottom line, what's financially sustainable, then that means more money is going to go in other directions. And so that's why I talked about it at the very beginning about, our discipline, why our, quote unquote, our origin story is so fascinating. Because, you've got to go some interesting kinds of places to wind up where we are. But we're so passionate about what we do because it's basically almost anything and everything that we do. AFS used to do these fabulous T-shirts. And one of the ones, I've got a couple of them, and one of the ones is a takeoff on the Got Milk commercial, and it's Got Lore. The other one is folklore, right here, right now. So wherever, sorry, I should probably be here. Sorry. So that wherever you are, there's a way of, this is folklore.
That might be a good way to conclude.
I'm
You're absolutely right.